All right. Well, welcome everyone to this episode of What's Next. I'm your host, Matthew Quinn, and I'm very excited to have in our studio today the artistic director and scenic designer from Houston's very own Alley Theater, Texas's oldest theater, and one of the large Lort theaters that we have in our country. And we're going to be talking about their pivot, their plans, and what they've done during this COVID crisis. So I'd like to start by bringing into the studio Michael Locher. Michael, hello.
Hello, Matthew.
Coming to us live from Houston. Michael Locher is Alley's director of design and freelance scenic designer. His recent and upcoming regional credits include productions for the Guthrie Theater, Oregon Shakespeare Festival, Repertory Theater of St. Louis, Yale Repertory Theater, Center Stage in Baltimore, California Shakespeare Theater, Great Lakes Theater, and Playmakers Repertory Company. Whew, there you go. Michael's designs have been seen off-Broadway and at venues throughout New York and the Northeast. His Bay Area credits include numerous productions with the Magic, Center Rep, and the Cutting Ball Theater, where he is a longtime artistic associate. Michael served as a professor at San Jose State University for 6 years before joining the Alley Theater as director of design in the summer of 2019. He also works as a freelance illustrator and graphic designer, specializing in work for the performing arts. And he's also a graduate of the University of California, San Diego, and the Yale School of Drama. Thank you very much for joining us, Michael.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. And next to Mr. Locher, we have the artistic director of Alley Theater, Mr. Rob Melrose.
Hi, Matthew. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. I'm going to talk a little bit about you now.
Sure, go for it.
Mr. Melrose is the artistic director at the Alley Theater, where he has directed productions of The Winter's Tale, 1984, and The Murder of the Orient Express. He was formerly the artistic director and co-founder of the Cutting Ball Theater in San Francisco. He has directed at the Public Theater, the Guthrie Theater, the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, Magic Theater, the Old Globe, Playmakers Rep, as well as Black Box Theater, the Actors Collective, and Crowded Fire. He has taught at Stanford University, UC Berkeley, USF, the University of Rhode Island, and Marin Academy. He has a BA in English and Theater from Princeton and an MFA in the directing from the Yale School of Drama. Mr. Melrose recently directed Strindberg's Svarta Hadsken, The Black Glove, in Stockholm, Sweden at Strindberg's Intimate Theater. He has also translated a huge slew of production and written a few original plays himself, including, and this I have to say was my favorite, a rock musical adaptation of L. Frank Baum's Ozma of Oz with the San Francisco electro rock group Zonk.
Woo.
Woo! All right. Well, welcome, Mr. Melrose.
Thank you. It's so great to be here.
Great to have you. Also coming in live from Houston. So, Michael and Rob, I tend to start this show. First off, thanks for coming. I tend to start this show asking our guests to kind of give us an idea of where they were when in January and as everything was starting for our 2020, and then mid-March, what the pivot and kind of the immediate, we'll unpack some of the later plans, but immediately what kind of happened and where you were in that. So, Michael, we can start with you.
Yeah. Well, Rob can actually speak more to this, but well, no, for both of us, the pivot point was it was dramatic and bittersweet. By which I mean we'd spent months working on our new production of 1984 for the Alley Theater, a production adaptation by Michael Dean Sullivan, who a friend of both of ours, and perhaps a friend of yours as well, Matthew. It was a production that we considered ambitious from an artistic perspective. We had a wonderful opening night. The nervous chatter around the gala and around the drinks was, well, we did it. This is great. I hope we get to stay open. And as it were, that was our one performance.
One performance. Wow. So Rob, what you guys had a whole season planned though, right? I mean,
Oh yeah.
It was all planned out. Where was this in your season? Where was 1984?
We still we have two theaters, a large theater upstairs and a slightly smaller one downstairs. And so we had two plays running. We had 1984, which, as Michael said, was opened and then was closed the next day. Downstairs, we had Larry Wright's wonderful play, Camp David, about Jimmy Carter brokering the Camp David Accord between Egypt and Israel. It still had 1 week left, and it was good. It was running really well, and also sales for 1984 were really great. And so it was really. I felt like we had. This was my first season at the Alley, my first season that I programmed. So I just felt like we were really hitting our stride, doing some ambitious work, and having audiences really come and appreciate it. And then next downstairs was going to be American by Chisa Hutchinson, who it's a world premiere. We're still going to do it just later on, but that was a play that we were all really excited about. It's just absolutely brilliant, and we were thrilled to be bringing it to its first audience. And then upstairs, we were going to finish the season with Kate Hamill's adaptation of Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility, directed by Adriana Baer. It's Audrey. So we were very about that as well. So a lot of heartbreak in that moment. We did, even though Michael said, we only had one official performance, but we did have some previews of 1984. So it was awesome to get to see it in front of an audience. And in Houston, kind of the deal was, I didn't realize it until I moved there, but the rodeo is a major thing. It takes up the entire football stadium and more. And the football stadium is the rodeo that you know and love. But then outside of the stadium is a market, and it's just a huge thing. It goes 3 weeks, and of course all these other cities were closing down. But Houston was kind of saying, we're in the middle of rodeo season, where there's no way we're gonna close the rodeo. It's like the biggest thing, and the nervous talk that night was because at noon, the day of opening, the rodeo had closed, which was a big shock because we felt like the rodeo can't close; it's impossible.
Right.
And the very next day, the mayor closed all gatherings over 250. So that's when we closed both shows. And our pivot, our really nice pivot, was our general manager Brandon Kahn. He went to Columbia for grad school, and his thesis was about the moment when the NFL decided to start televising games. And it's hard to imagine, but that was a very controversial conversation way back when, because the feeling was, well, if you give viewership for the games away for free, no one's going to want to buy tickets to come to the stadium. And of course, Brandon's thesis is all about, that's the argument with theater too, but actually with the NFL experience is that they actually gained fans and gained awareness, and it all of a sudden became a thing that everybody could participate in. And so this is something that we had been hoping to try for a long time, even before COVID, of like, what would it be like if we could televise a show and share it with our audience, so that if they can't get a sitter that night, or if they're out of town, they can tune in to an Alley show. So we immediately asked all the unions if we could have concessions because of the situation we were in, and the unions were terrific. They were really helpful. They offered us concessions. They basically said, you can sell as many digital tickets as there are seats in your theater, so it can be kind of an even trade. And And so we filmed. So we closed the show on Thursday, and literally that weekend we were back in the theater, doing one run just to get it back in our system. And then the next day we filmed it with 3 cameras.
Wow.
And we put it out for 2 weeks. And what was cool and kind of, looking towards the future, we got just an awesome review by Terry Teachout in the Wall Street Journal, where he said the production was superior to the Broadway production, and that to get the review in and of itself was awesome, and something that we never would have been able to do if we hadn't filmed it. But getting such a positive review was super exciting, and it just made us think, wow, this, when we come back from COVID, I hope that sharing projects digitally in the same way that the Met Opera and the National Theatre Live regularly does, hoping that becomes kind of a regular thing, because it really was a positive experience for us.
And of course, it wasn't just Terry Teachout. I think we all had the experience as Alley folk of telling our friends in California and our friends overseas and our friends all around the country that they can finally watch a show of ours without traveling to Houston. And the geographic distribution of ticket sales to our 1984 was unlike anything we'd ever had before, which is really exciting, and just spoke to that potential that Brendan, Kahn, and Rob have discussed.
Yeah, I definitely, one of the silver linings that have come out is this bigger international. And I know Terry has covered quite a few shows from around the nation. And that is really exciting, the exposure that artists are getting to this world market, as well as actors and talent that they're able to work with. So that's great. Well, it sounds like that pivot was very quick. It sounded like you guys were already kind of thinking about it, which I'm noting several companies have, and that's a real advantage, the foresight of looking at that. And I have to say, like most of my guests and people I've been talking to, I was tracking what everybody was doing mid-March, kind of because, I was home too, and to see what everyone was doing. And I really realized, one of the things I noticed was how quickly Alley did seem to pivot. You guys got 1984. You dealt with the unions, which I know a lot of people had some problems with. So good on you to move that through. And then one of the most stunning realizations, and hopefully you can go a little bit more into this, is you seem to quickly pivot with grant writing and getting money in to kind of keep your staff on board. While many theaters had closed up shop or furloughed 90% of their staff and were just, we'll see it. I mean, even Guthrie was basically made a very sweet video about how they were going to come back in spring of next year. But you guys suddenly were rehiring your staff. You were getting active. Tell us a little bit more about that, because I was very impressed by that.
Yeah. Well, when it first happened, we did have to do a really painful, more severe layoff, and started a fundraising campaign, a Lights Up campaign that our wonderful development department has started back then, and has just, they have not let up. They're doing great. But yes, our grant writers and our finance people got right on the CARES Act, right? And so they wrote an application right away, and that allowed us to hire everyone back. So we hired everyone back at first, and we were able to guarantee everybody their payments to the end of June, and then at the end of June, that's when we had to make some more layoffs, some permanent layoffs, which were, of course, painful. But here's what's different is that because we were committed to being poised to do theater, and we have a resident acting company, and we have artists like Michael who are on staff. We basically said our job is to pursue our mission with whatever means are available to us, whether that be digital, whether it be socially distanced theater. So it meant that we're a number of theaters who, either because of their boards who said, you've got to go into hibernation, or because of their governors, some governors said, no theater until a vaccine, those theaters had to lay off 80% of their staff. We had to lay off like 33% of their staff, which was still painful, of course, and we missed the people that we had to lay off, and at the same time, we kept enough people so that we're still a viable theater, able to consider making work, and that's exactly what we did. So our actors actually were never laid off. They were right before COVID hit. We made the decision to make our actors. We have a resident company of 8 actors, and before I got to the Alley, the long-standing tradition had been for them to have contracts and be on contract and off contract, and we decided to make them full-time employees of the Alley like moments before COVID, and so they've been full-time the whole time, and that's been tremendous because they're more than the building. Our audience really, their deeper connection is to those people, and so we've been doing work online with that group, and that's been our way of keeping our audience connected. And we've been doing sonnets. We're about to release a bunch of our thrills and chills stories. We usually do a mystery in the summer called Summer Chills, and we had the actors, usually Agatha Christie or Sherlock Holmes, and so we had the actors do stories by Agatha Christie, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Edgar Allan Poe, and so we've got those coming out. We also thought this would be a great time to kind of expand our audience's idea of what the repertory is. There are lots of short plays by interesting playwrights. There are short plays by new playwrights who we love, and there are some longer plays like the ancient Greeks and some modernists who our audience hasn't seen in 20 years, and so we've been exploring them with our actors, and we've actually got plans that we'll be announcing soon about ways to share those. And at the same time, so that's our digital strategy. At the same time, our other fork in the road, and we're kind of going down both forks simultaneously, is to do a socially distanced season the minute we're able to. And we've submitted our plans to everyone, and everyone says the plans look great. The only thing that has to happen is the numbers in Houston need to be lower. And so we're poised to do these shows. We've got a plan, and a big part of the plan, and I'll pass it over to Michael, is to do these 6 plays that we've announced on what we're calling a flexible season set with our resident acting company. So everybody's here in Houston. The designers are here in Houston. The actors, we've been working on a lot of these shows, both design-wise and acting-wise. It's just, and now we're ready for when those numbers go down to do socially distanced seating in our theater. And Michael will talk a little bit about what this set looks like.
Before I let Michael, and that was a great lead-in, Rob. That was very smooth. First of all, I wanna just comment from it. I've just got to say, wow, this is so impressive. Jonathan Tipton Myers, I couldn't agree more. You guys have put a lot of thought into this. The fact that you were watching out for your actors. And Michael, before you go into the set, I mean, a lot of tech people, I mean, you've been working this time. A lot of tech people have not had that advantage, right?
Absolutely. In fact, I wish there were I wish there were good news to report about the state of my field, because I thought nothing more. I don't know if there's a freelance designer out there who hasn't considered moving on from the business over this time, or who doesn't have colleagues that actually have. It is a rough situation, and I have, and I think all of us do have friends and colleagues, established people, mid-career people, who are doing handyman work, or who are doing web design all of a sudden, and who set aside top level careers because there simply isn't work. So it's a rough situation. All the typical avenues that most designers have to rely on for income, whether it's academia or commercial work, those areas have slowed down as well. So when your primary career is on ice and your backup career is pumping the brakes, that's rough. So a minute just to plug. I mean, I would encourage everyone, and many of you are already on this boat, I'm sure. But if you haven't already, you have to look into organizations like Be an Arts Hero and others, which are mobilizing political attention towards getting relief aid into the arts sector and into the pockets of theater artists who are unemployed or underemployed, because more of them than you would ever care to know have their backs against the wall. And I'm very fortunate to have the work that I have with the Alley right now, but I'm sure many people in your audience understand just how incredibly desperate the situation is. So that's where the hope lies, right? The hope lies that there is still opportunity to move the needles in the right directions in terms of getting help for people. Yeah.
Well said, and I appreciate that plug out there for the tech and actors who are having issues. And on the flip side, a big thanks to Allie, Rob, the general manager, the team over there, that it's positioning itself, as Rob said, is poised to open as soon as it can. And part of that, by no doubt, was working out a plan of how do we get actors on stage so we don't have a season of solo work. And so being safe for the actors, for the audience. And I know you brought some plans. I would love, as I'm sure the audience would too, to kind of see how you are solving this problem with a genius plan of a set to be used for the season. So we got that.
I'll get to that in a minute. Let me lead into it, if that's okay. Yeah,
I
want to give some credit where credit's
Please
due.
do.
So I mean, Rob, our general manager, Brandon Kahn, whom Rob's already mentioned, others at the company, our production manager, Ray Inkle, they get a lot of credit for helping to birth this idea in the first place. Because initially, the inspiration for this is an inspiration of managerial chops. Really, it's this idea about resource management. We have that's we like ours. We have artists in house. We have a resident acting company, like Rob said. So initially, it's this inspiration of administration to say, hey, we're on one hand we're losing ticket income right now. Our budgets are way down, and on the other hand, we can't do live performance at the moment if we want to. So what's a practical solution, right, for working in a leaner, more cost-efficient way, but also in a nimble way, right? A way that's more forgiving if schedules shift, if the season is delayed, if parts need to be canceled or moved around, if we have to come up with a staging plan that involves actors standing 6, 8, 10 feet apart. What's the practical on-stage response to those pressures? And I'll say that when they first raised the idea of performing the season then on some sort of flexible modular set that would accommodate these kinds of changes and ideas, my initial reaction was disappointment. Of course, I'm a designer, and we like to think big, and we like to think with a fresh, creative slate every time a new show comes along. But of course, the more I talked, the more we brainstormed the idea, the more it became clear that there was a real opportunity here, not just a practical opportunity and a business opportunity, but an artistic opportunity, right? To take this idea of a modular season solution, and to sort of own it artistically, to make it something that we were actually really proud of, something that would would on one hand acknowledge the differences of the moment, but also feel like a real thing. So with that, yeah, maybe I will just go to my imagery now. Hang on here. I've joked about this that we are 7 months into this and I still have trouble switching through apps. But let's see here. All right, we'll do that.
Coming in. Let's see.
Coming in.
Oh,
Great.
right.
All right. So here, if I may, I'll say that we began looking at ideas that would deliberately communicate to the audience a sense of what we were up to sort of invite them into an event space or a festival space. We looked at things like Shakespeare's Globe. We looked at outdoor festival spaces. We looked at even the history of the alley itself. Here's the basic shell design, the skeletal foundation. The structure itself has a few tricks built into it. I'll show those in a minute. But first, just to go back to some of those inspirations before I talk through what this thing is. Again, looking at structures like the Globe, like the repertory theaters of the 1960s, of which the alley is a great example. These structures that were sort of communal and which sort of helped the audience understand the kind of experience they were getting. That wasn't a movie, it was a piece of theater. These are obvious touch points. This is the alley theater itself. Circa 1968, and for many, many years, when this part of the theater was first designed, Nina Vance, the company's founder, had this idea that, and this is a very 1960s idea, but the idea that the stage itself could have these permanent implements that would help it support a kind of monumental neoclassical theater that wouldn't necessarily require a lot of scenery. So a lot of the things you see here on stage, these ramps on the sides, its sort of elevator system, were permanent to the stage when it was first built. So it was important for us to think about the ways that the alley theater itself had this flexible season set built into its DNA. And that was cool. So then back to our solution and my design here. It's got a lot of tricks built into it. It features this central bridge that can raise and lower. If you watch, I'll make it raise and lower in different sections.
Oh, so cool.
It has a center, thank you, a center curved staircase that can go away. The floor has a revolving, ring-shaped donut turntable, and that sort of curved dark spot you see there, off center to in the upper right of that center circle, is a sort of spiral stair trap that goes down. Excuse me, there's a truck going by me. And then above, there's this stylized halo of light made with glowing tubes, and similar tubes of light gracing the scaffold. It's part of this impulse to take this Shakespearean Globe inspiration and merge it with something that reminded people the alley is a high-tech theater and a modern theater. And we wanted it to feel like something the audience would be interested to see each time they came back. What's it going to do? So it's designed to support modularity. So I'm going to go through a few renderings now of some designs and concepts that we're working on for the season.
Cool.
So here, for instance, I can get back onto my screen. Here we go. Here the bridge is raised to form a sort of ceiling, and a scenic wall is installed beneath it. And this is one kind of a look, and this is, yes, one thing that we're exploring for our show this season. Here, or to flip forward again, is a more open design that sort of graces the space with atmospheric details. It reconfigures the light sculpture above into a sort of vertical shape so that those light tubes feel more like something else, like taper candles, for instance. Here's a look which supports a bar interior in an urban setting. Here's a sort of an attempt to contrast the upstage and above area with the more intimate interior space below. So trying to divide the space up in different ways. Here is a look that involves actors spread across the structure with a variety of props and scenic elements to give sort of a backstage look. So lots of different approaches to this thing, and all of them, I think, potentially allow for a clear the decks kind of approach that allows actors to be spread around the space, up on levels, upstage, downstage, on the bridge, off to the sides, on the curved stair when it's in place, and be apart from each other if need be. If there are versions of productions that need to be staged with sort of pockets of action across the stage, we can certainly do that. But we don't have to. We aren't limited to it. So with that, I'm going to unshare my screen, try and bring the world back.
Wow.
Does that work? Thank
Beautiful.
you.
We're here. Wow.
Thanks, Matthew.
That's first of all, gorgeous design.
Appreciate it.
And your whole team, Rob, your whole team coming together and problem solving. If anything, I think we find these tough times really make you appreciate.
Yes. I'm fortunate to have to be working with lots of wonderful people. Michael being one of many great people.
Well, I want to give a shout out, of course, to the production staff, which has been working on this up until very recently, almost entirely from home. So technical director, his assistants, painter, who've all been helping me conceive this, budget it, get it drafted out from their kitchens, from their bedrooms, with kids around, putting this thing together. People working really, really hard behind the scenes to win. Behind the scenes is working for months with distance learning kids. So big shout out to a whole lot of people. Yeah.
And you see a lot of thought in there. One of the things that crossed my mind, and obviously the director, scenic designer, set designer's relationship is so critical in terms of laying all of this out. But even now more so, you've got this COVID 6 feet, 8 feet, that conversation, because I did see some actors kind of close together in the rendering, and you've got a lot of play space, but you needed to give Rob a lot of playroom here so that he can work with it. And the two levels help.
Exactly. Lots of levels and lots of modularity in how people can be spaced out. So as you've seen from those drawings, there are shows that we envision doing with actors that are in close contact. And Rob can speak more to some of the rehearsal plans and different models that we have in place. But are there, as you said, are there discussions that involve rehearsals and on-stage productions where that's not an option for some reason? The answer is yes. And those are interesting conversations because they involve, of course, not just how do we design this in a certain way, but how do the conversations between director and designer differ when you plan on imagining a space that can be used this way or can be used with actors occupying, pods spread out across the space. And how does your audience relate to that? We've talked about having plexiglass shields lining the bombs and things like that just to keep any areas where there may be less than 6 feet of contact between actor and audience to a minimum. It's tricky.
I bet. Well, that looks like a great start. Rob, any comments you want to kind of add to that?
It's as Michael kind of demonstrated, it's kind of exciting to have this set that is so flexible and malleable and kind of harkens back to the original impulses of the regional theater movement, which of course resident acting companies was part of that, and the Alley is unique in that it's never given up its resident acting company, and what we're really proud of is that's really been serving us well, because a lot of my colleagues feel like they haven't been an artist for 6 months, right? And we've been doing our work. It's been under different circumstances, but we've been rehearsing this entire time and designing, and that's been it's kind of great. I mean, this is again something that was brewing even before COVID, which is I'm part of a new group of artistic directors. I'm less than 2 years old, and there's a bunch of other new. There's about 20 new artistic directors in Lort, and it's kind of a new energy, and there's a feeling of what's new, but also what's old. What were the original impulses to starting these theaters, and how do we get back to that? And I feel like COVID has kind of forced us to lean into some of those original impulses, and I think those have been really good things.
Yeah, it seems that from what you've been describing of your team and everybody all hands on deck and looking towards the future, how many shows are you planning, COVID willing, to put on that set? Like, what's the season for that set look like?
It's six plays, including Christmas Carol. So it's Christmas Carol, Sweat by Lynn Nottage, Dead Man's Cell Phone by Sarah Rule, Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett, the world premiere of Liz Duffy Adams' Born with Teeth, and also the world premiere of Bichette Chum's high school play, A Nostalgia Fest.
Nice. Wow. Excellent season. And when you did that set, Michael, was it more of a, and I know it's a team, so was it knowing what that season was and planning for that, or was it more we need a general play stage, so depending on whatever happens, this is going to kind of work with it?
Yes and yes, or yes and no, more accurately. So if you've followed Alley press releases since COVID broke, you know that we've had to pivot around a few times in season planning, and you can imagine that in a time like this behind the scenes, the lineup has shuffled and shifted a lot. So part of the history of this design is that it was designed for one set of shows and then adjusted for another set of shows and another set of shows, and there are interesting artifacts of the design in my head that I've been wrestling with and adapting and moving around, because the season is 2-3 shows different looking now than it was at a different point in the season for lots of different reasons. So on some level, I appreciate the patience of everyone involved with me, and people like Rob and Brandon Weinbrenner, Rob's associate in the building, who's also a director and will be directing some of the shows this season, and others who have had to pivot with me while I pivoted this thing. On some level, you're absolutely right that the mission was to imagine something that was as versatile as possible, no matter what. But the temptation to tailor the thing to these 4 shows or these 5 shows was one both to build off of it and ultimately to resist and required me to access that really adaptable part of my designer brain that we all try and keep active.
Yeah, that's kind of what we're learning now. You've got to kind of do that. All right. That's really interesting, and I love the design. The season sounds phenomenal, and we're all thinking very positive here. We all vaccine, and I know we've heard Fauci talk, and there's a lot, but with the plan now, where are you kind of looking for the end of this year, beginning of next year? Like, what's the dream situation?
Oh, I mean, obviously the dream situation would be that a vaccine comes out tomorrow and we're all great. I mean, it seems pie in the sky, and right across the street from us, the symphony is doing 3 symphonies a week. So so they're doing socially distanced seating, socially distanced playing, no woodwinds, no brass, but but they're they're figuring it out. So it's not out of the question, and at the same time, we're completely, we know that if the numbers don't get to a certain point, we can't start rehearsing. So we have backup options of going digital with some of these projects, and I mean, we've got our own digital offerings already planned, and those will go forward. But these plans that are supposed to go on stage, we have both a pivot of having them be digital, but we also, because the set is so flexible, we also have pivots of moving things around, squeezing things in a little bit more. We also have the ability, if we do get going and there's a spike and the theater has to close down again, unlike most theaters that would have to fly all their actors back to New York and tear down the set and build a new one. It's just for us, it just means, okay, actors go back home and the set just stays as it is. And then when we're ready to come back, and maybe we pick up a little bit of that last show and then move on to the next show. But we're just very, very nimble.
Yeah, I think that's the word. It's the nimbleness. With a team that you know and trust, that your audience knows, and that you're being very clear of the situation. This is the reality. Speaking of the online streaming shows, have you guys been watching any of these? What's your general kind of take on them? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, the cool thing was, I don't know if you remember, I mean, it's so funny, like people often say, there are different phases of the quarantine. Like there was the Tiger King phase, right? Where, but around the Tiger King phase, like the beginning, that was a time when all these theaters in Europe were sharing their archives, because unlike the US, in Europe, they get multi-camera archives of all their shows. So they had amazing content to share. And unfortunately, in the US, our because of the way we've worked with media in the theater, most of the archive shows, one camera set up in the back. It's just a single wide shot, where Michael and I consumed like 20 or 30 amazing productions from all over. I'll let Michael, but there have been different phases, but that was the first phase. Michael, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, no, no, absolutely. I mean, on one hand, there is the kind of work that we've been talking about doing ourselves here, which is the Zoom theater and different variations of that. But Rob's right in that kicking off this period, we spent a lot of time just watching broadcasts of theater, and like you said, Rob, sort of voraciously consuming theater. And now that we're in this phase where we're watching other theaters' Zoom work, but also talking at length about what kinds of online offerings we can make for ourselves. I felt like we went to school. We sort of went to Zoom Theater College and Computer Theater University in watching all this material. Not just the stuff in Europe, but also, to be clear, there are theaters here stateside that have been really adventurous and really brave. Yeah. I don't know if Rob, you want to get some shout outs to anything that you've seen that's particularly inspirational, but the truth is we've seen work which we refer to constantly in our conversations now about the kind of thing we want to be able to do and that we're working on and planning, which has been, it's a reminder how on one hand, so few things in art are truly ever new. We're always building off each other. But on the other hand, man, times like this breed such innovation. Yeah. And it has been a real one of those silver linings, Matthew, has been the degree of innovation and courage that we've seen from so many of these productions. Rob, you want to shout out to any?
Yes. So the Public Theater has been doing some great stuff. I've always been a big fan of the playwright Richard Nelson and his Apple Family plays. And, Richard's aesthetic is like super realism, so much so that the audience surrounds the stage when it's live, and each actor wears a body mic so they can just speak normally. Well, that transferred just beautifully to Zoom, just having the 4 squares and just having people just converse, and it didn't feel any different from a Zoom call. But of course, it was modern people talking about Boccaccio's Decameron, and how the couples in the Decameron tell stories, and that's how they get through the plague. And so all of a sudden, these people on Zoom are telling stories, and it just, I just thought it was pretty amazing. And then of course, there's Bill Irwin did this thing for Barry Edelstein at the Old Globe called In Zoom, and it was Bill Irwin kind of figuring out, well, what does clowning look like in Zoom, and they would do kind of funny things where the arm would, if Michael pretends to be to be an arm, they would do things like kind of pretend reaching into the other person's screen, and Bill Irwin would imitate freezing, so that was great. And then Theater Squared in Arkansas and Theater Works. Theater Works Hartford did they did a workshop, but they're going to do the whole thing soon, called Russian Troll Farm, which is just terrific. It's about the Russians, creating fake accounts during the 2016 election, and what they've done, and what my friend Elizabeth Williamson, who's one of the directors, did, is they really just said, it was a play written for the theater, but they said, this could be we could just reconceive this as an online experience, because it is so much about online stuff, and that's right. And they've already, I saw a workshop of it that was already really impressive, and they're going to keep going with it, and so that's going to be cool. And meanwhile, so we've got this huge lineup of things that we're going to start pumping out very soon that we're excited about as well. But you'll have to stay tuned for those.
Stay tuned for that. Well, the first two that you mentioned were probably the two first online shows that I saw in Zoom. And what do we need to know? What do we need to talk about?
What should we be talking about?
Yeah. And it really did set a nice high bar and really encouraged, I think, people to play. And you're seeing a lot more of that. And the technology is changing. I mean, I think as you guys start to explore more, Zoom has already changed its technical configuration. It's becoming a little bit more user-friendly in terms of letting things lock into place and not this random moving around. And I've heard a lot of talk. I will share the term Streamweave. Get ready, Streamweave.
Okay.
That's supposed to allow the system where everything can come into one computer. You could create a set. Michael could design a beautiful set that you can control lights and everything, and then you plug everybody on that set. So a lot of minds kind of working on this future. So that's great. And I obviously hope for the best in things opening up soon. But I think it's exciting to hear your awareness of what's going on there and kind of possibilities for Ali exploring the online market. And not only that, as you mentioned earlier, you will probably be investing in some of these shows online after, like a Hamilton version, so to speak, of your shows. And I think that's very exciting.
Yeah.
All right. So kind of moving into another section here. Along with the news of theaters closing, furloughs, all of that. Shortly after the George Floyd murder and protests that resulted, there was a list that went up by Marie Sisko, who we actually had on the show a couple months ago. And it was an accountability list. So it basically said which theater companies, larger companies, had not necessarily made a comment after, I think it was like June 1st or May 30th, about Black Lives Matter and where they stood with it, and also what were they going to do about it. And I think it set kind of a ripple throughout the theater community. People were talking about it. There was praise, but concern. And several companies, and I couldn't help but notice that Ali was up there and that you guys quickly made a statement. But one of the things that I thought was interesting about is they're kind of doing an aftermath follow-up on it. So it's one thing just to say, post the logo, Black Lives Matter, and yeah, we're for this. And then what are you really doing about it? So a company like Ali, large theater company in Houston, Texas, what's your approach with that? How did that event kind of affect it and your plans for the future?
Sure. Well, part of my kind of coming in a year and a half ago, replacing an artistic director who'd been at the Alley for 29 years with a certain aesthetic and a certain way of leading, which is very different from mine. And of course, one thing I wanted to do right away, because one of the first things as I was exploring Houston, one of the first things I did is I watched Anthony Bourdain's show about Houston, and he said, a lot of you don't know what Houston's really about. Houston is one of the most diverse cities in the world, and he went into the South Asian community and ate food there and did things there. He went into the Vietnamese community. He went into the Black community. And he just said, this town is so cool. This town is so amazing. This is what makes this town great. And it's one of the things that got me excited about coming to the Alley is I felt like, gosh, if a regional theater reflected a community that's this interesting and this diverse, that could be awesome. That would be the kind of regional theater that I'd be excited about. Right. And then I found out that our founder, Nina Vance, when she first founded the theater, 73 years ago, she said, the way she announced it is she announced, Houston, this is your theater. Mm-hmm. And so it's been kind of my mantra to ask at all times, how do we make sure that this is everyone's theater? So that all Houston feels like this is their theater. Now, so that's something that we were already doing, and that's reflected in the programming for my first season. What changed and what was really positive about this awareness, right? That this awakening, kind of coming to terms with who this country's been and how we need to change, is that it was an opportunity to do deeper changes, not just programming, right? The programming was something that I could change pretty easily right from the beginning, but having the whole staff do anti-racism training, mm-hmm. and really kind of asking ourselves, how do we want to be in the world? What kind of work environment do we want to be? How do we make sure that everybody not only is welcome, but everybody is able to bring their best selves, mm-hmm. and not have to fight off microaggressions, not have to fight off all the things that the structures of white supremacy do to keep people from living up to their full potential. Mm-hmm. And so that deep work has been something that all this has opened up, and we've been really taking advantage of doing it. And people can go on our website, but because we've been listening to people in our community. There's of course the We See You White American Theater document, which we've been reading and going through and listening to, and we made our own statement. We made our statement after the murder of George Floyd, but then shortly after that, we made a list of commitments called Actions Speak Louder Than Words, and then just last week we've done updates and additions to those. And so on our website, we're going to be transparent with this work, and anybody who wants to can kind of keep up with how we're changing and how we're living up to our original statement.
Well, that's great, Rob. Well said. I appreciate the current activeness, because I think that's one thing. As I have talks about this, there's this kind of feeling like, oh yeah, it's that one time, like February. Oh, it's African American History Month. We're going to do our thing, and then it kind of flows. It's nice that you came in before George Floyd's murder, that and that you're continuing to be active. So great. Thank you for sharing that. Well, we're getting at the top of the hour, but we had a couple comments that I wanted to bring out. First is for Michael. These has to do with some of your design elements. You had mentioned some of the things you had brought in and out. What are some of those design elements that you kept and dropped throughout the different stages, different drafts of this stage? Do you have any specifics like that?
That's a fun question. I'll say this. I'll say that that an initial draft of the season was let's say heavily skewed towards period England, which was not. It was largely had to do with a shuffling of shows, and it didn't stay that way for long. But around the time that I was drawing a lot of this, it was heavily skewed towards Victorian England, and so there are versions of this thing from early on where it wasn't just a removable spiral stair in the middle, but it was a spiral stair that looked like it was pulled out of Downton Abbey or something. And beyond that, luckily, the skeletal set as it exists right now isn't too dissimilar. What's really changed has been all the additional, and I'll say time-consuming drawings I've done of the individual show looks that have involved different parts of project that just don't exist anymore. So there's the show that had the big rocks in the dollhouse. That's gone. I'm not going to see that one. And those pieces have been removed, and they're never ever made it past the sketch phase.
Basically, the skeleton was really handling all the kind of issues that you had with physically distanced theater, and then it was flexible enough that you could just then add what you needed to add. Is that kind of a sense?
On some level, it did what it had to do in terms of being flexible enough to not waste too much of my time as the season shifted, and the concepts had to shift as well.
Interesting. Oh, that's great. Well, thank you for that, Miles. And Monica Bauer. All right. I love the show because we always get a pitch session. So get ready, Rob. Monica Bauer, here is a usable play that's not a solo show. I've got a 90-minute two-hander for two African-American actors where they're altering monologues. Arizona Theater Company, and that's Sean Daniels, right? Isn't that Sean? Is doing it's in January. Would you be interested in looking at the script? No contact between the actors.
Great. So sure, send it to Matt.
I know Monica. Send it to me, Monica, and I'll make sure Rob gets it. You gotta love that internet, man. Pitching the artistic director at Alley Theater in Houston, live online. So as we are kind of fast approaching the top, what immediately, I'd love to give a shout out for any projects that you guys have going. We got your website up there. Anything that you'd like to call attention for the immediate future?
Right now, if you go to Alley at Home, well, you'll see alleytheater.org. And you'll see the actions speak louder than words statements that you can read. But then also click on Alley at Home. And we've got, right now, we've got the Shakespeare Sonnets. We've got, with our resident acting company members, we've got interviews with kind of inside the actor studio with our resident acting company members. And we're going to be doing our Thrills and Chills very soon. But also, we've got our education and community engagement department. And right now, we're in the middle of celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. And we've got people reading short stories by Octavio Solis from his book, Retablos. We also have our first draft, where community members talk about different experiences that they've had from their lives. And also just a lot of other things that the Education and Community Engagement Department is doing is really, really robust and exciting. We've actually made one of our rehearsal studios into a TV studio, and we've been kind of creating lots of great content. So there's lots to explore on Alley at Home, and they call they have something called Fun at Home, which is for the kids. So lots of activities for the kids. So check it out. There's lots of great stuff there.
Oh, I love that. Wow. You guys are busy over there.
We're busy. We've never stopped. We never stop.
Well, I've got to give a big thanks to Alley Theater, Rob, Michael, your team, which sounds like very extensive. Thanks for keeping the hope alive, guys. Ladies,
well,
team,
thanks for having us. So great to be here.
Yeah, because it really, a lot of theaters have closed. I think people are concerned. And if a large regional theater can have so much ingenuity, innovative, positive thoughts. I think that sets a really good example. So thank you for being leaders in that. And thanks for being on the show. It was wonderful talking to you.
Thank you, Matthew.
Great to be.
And thank you for keeping the hope alive. This is keeping the hope alive. So
well,
thanks.
I try. And each show has just been, it's been very educational for me. Next week, I'll use this as my segue. Next week, we've got staff from the Edinburgh Fringe and the World Fringe to talk about what fringe pivots are doing, fringes around the world. And what's the other one? There was something else good. They're all good. But I think we've also got some stand-up comics coming in. And so keep an eye out. Check our YouTube channel, youtube.com/combinedartform. Take a look at our past episodes. Subscribe if you like. And again, everyone, have a great weekend. Thank you, Rob, Michael, for tuning in. Stay safe in Houston. Miles, you can lead us out. Talk to you all soon. Bye now.